Hey everybody, I'm Jay Scherr with Jay Scherr Business Consulting. We help entrepreneurs, business owners, and other leaders maximize their potential, build rock-solid foundations for their businesses, and create more freedom in their lives. And you've joined Business Minds Coffee Chat. Aristotle is attributed to the quote, "Knowing yourself is the beginning of all wisdom." In today's world, science and big data might know more about you than you know about yourself. Well, on this episode, we're going to dive into the fascinating world of psychological targeting, how it works, how it's used to influence our decisions, how we can harness its power, ethical implications, and more. My guest is a computational social scientist and an award-winning researcher who is revolutionizing the way we understand human behavior and the role of psychology in shaping our world. She's a professor of business at Columbia Business School, author of the book Mindmasters, a TEDx and keynote speaker. Her research explores how digital footprints, such as our online behaviors, social media interactions, and even purchases, can reveal deep insights into our personality, decision-making, and well-being. Her work has frequently been covered by major media outlets, including The Economist, The New York Times, The Wall Street Journal, Forbes, and Business Insider. Please welcome the woman who's making data relatable to help all of us make better decisions, Dr. Sandra Matz. Sandra, it is great to see you. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you so much for having me on the show, Jay. Really appreciate it.
Absolutely. It is my pleasure. And as I mentioned to you before we started recording, this topic and the subjects that we're going to be talking about today have fascinated me for years. And I'm really interested to hear your insights and all the amazing things that you're going to be sharing with our audience today. So let's dive right in. I thought a good starting point would be for you to maybe share a memorable or a profound experience from your life and how that experience has informed the work that you do today.
Yeah, it's an interesting question because I think for me, generally speaking, the way that I think about this entire world of data and psychology, which seems very recent, right? It seems like this is something that's just been developing over the last couple of years. But whenever I go back to this notion of what does it mean on a fundamental level, I can't help but compare it to my experience of growing up in this tiny village in the southwest corner of Germany, which for me meant in a way two things. One is like there was always someone in my business, right? All of my neighbors around me knew exactly what I was doing on weekends, who I was dating, the music that I was into. And they used these insights to both kind of help me give support and advice by trying to figure out, well, what do I want to accomplish in life? What do I want to be when I finish high school? So they were there to offer the best advice really ever. But then they were also like, in a way, manipulating my life behind the scenes in a way that I didn't feel like I always had full control over and I didn't really appreciate. So this experience that I had growing up in this village that seems very much old school, has nothing to do with technology. I do think that there's like all of these parallels to what I think of the digital village that we live in today, where it's not your neighbors next door observing all of your behavior, making these inferences about who you are, and then trying to mess and interfere with your life. But it's algorithms. So algorithms make these observations pretty much on a daily basis, whether that's observing what you post on social media, right? Those are like very explicit identity claims, you putting stuff out there about your life. And the old school equivalent would be me putting a bumper sticker on the car, me putting up a poster. But then there's also all of these other traces that you generate that you don't even think about, right? If you think about your phone that captures your location pretty much 24/7, gets a sense of who do you interact with, or your credit card swipes, which we don't really think about as in like those are signals that we put out there for the world to see, but they still tell a lot about who we are as people. And the equivalent that I have there in the village is people saw me running to the bus. And it's not something that I wanted people to understand about me, that maybe I'm not the most organized, but those traces were just generated whether I wanted or not. Same is true in the online world. So I think that experience really shaped my way of thinking about having someone in your life and thinking through the upsides and the downsides.
So you open your latest book, Mindmasters, with really the story of growing up and what you just shared with us. And obviously you provide some more detail and context in the book. But it really is interesting to think about how even if you didn't come from a small community, even just in today's communities in which we live, no matter where it is, if you're out there, right, if you're out in meetings and in business and, just participating in community affairs, it's like people are always trying to find out more about your business and want to find out more about you. And they're trying to draw correlations and grab whatever data they can from wherever they can to learn as much as they can about you. And from a small example perspective and doing my due diligence in preparation for today's conversation, obviously I'm doing a lot of research from multiple sources, whether it's news media, social media, you name it, interviews, TEDx talks, all over the place, trying to really get into your world so I can better understand you, look at your body language, your behaviors, how you show up for people, so I can deliver the best experience not only for you but also for our listeners. So it's interesting to think about. And you brought something else up that I really hadn't given a lot of thought to. But when you mentioned bumper stickers, I think about today in such a highly polarized world. It's amazing that when you see a bumper sticker, it doesn't matter what it says, if it has anything to do with politics, religion, you name it, that we automatically form judgments. We have no other data point other than what the bumper sticker says. And then we can make an assumption that, that person's this way or that person's this way.
And we're very quick with these judgments, right? So what I love about the examples that you just gave is, for me, this is such a fundamentally human trait and like such a fundamentally human quality that in pretty much any type of social interactions, we try to figure out who's on the other side, right? Kids do this intuitively. Kids very quickly figure out, how do I ask mom for candy in a way that maximizes my chances of getting it, as opposed to how do I ask dad for candy? And then this goes all the way to, as adults, we know that you don't talk to a 3-year-old the same way that you talk to your spouse, the same way that you talk to your both in terms of the content, but also the how. So this idea that, like, as humans, we're naturally attuned to the perspective of the person on the other side, and very much like the way that we communicate is always customized, is always personalized. So to some extent, I think this shift to the digital world is just like replicating what we've done for centuries, and obviously in a slightly different tilted playing field, right? Back in the day, it used to be, you stalk me, but I also stalk you ahead of the session, so I get a sense of what this could be about. And I think that's just gone lost a little bit as we can make these more automated predictions based on people's digital footprints.
Oh, that is so good. So I want to stay back a little bit in your story, because I'm really interested to find out. So you talked about how your upbringing in that community obviously shaped and somewhat informed the work that you do today. But when did you No. When did you decide that this was the field that you wanted to pursue and that you decided to go all in and pursue this?
Yeah, it's a great question because in a way I stumbled upon this field. So I studied psychology in my undergrad because I was interested in human behavior, right? Psychology, the promise of psychology was always it's a behavioral science trying to understand human behavior. And that's what attracted me to the discipline initially. And I have to say that I was a little bit disappointed when I started my undergrad because what I realized is, yeah, we try to approximate behavior. We give people questionnaires and we ask them for their self-perception, maybe like a retrospective account of like what they did and how they felt in the moment. Or on the other extreme, we invite people to the lab and we have like these stylized computer experiments where they press a bunch of buttons. And then we take this data and we say, here's how the world works. Here's how human behavior plays out in the wild. And for me, there was always this very big leap of like, no, we're not, it's not actually a behavioral science. We're trying to approximate it, but we're not really getting there. So when I stumbled upon this group of researchers at the University of Cambridge, where I did an exchange year during my undergrad that had just started this field of can we understand human behavior and human psychology from a more computational data-driven lens? So looking at all the traces that we generate, again, social media, credit card spending, smartphone sensing data, to me, it felt this was suddenly an opportunity for psychology to live up to the promise of us studying behavior as it unfolds in everyday life. So that's really what attracted me to this kind of intersection of computer science, which there's a new methodology. We can make sense of data. We can look at people's actual lived experience day to day in a way that we couldn't do before. My favorite example of like, I think how what the leap was in psychology is before that there's like a seminal book that was published, I think in 1948 or something. It was two psychologists and they published an entire book on the lived experience of a boy that they followed for an entire day. So I think they probably had the same issue with psychology as I had. They were like, we don't really understand the daily experience. So let's pick a boy. I think Raymond Birch was his name, 7 years old, somewhere in rural Kansas. And what they did is for 24 hours had a team of 8 research assistants follow that little kid from the moment he woke up, all the conversations, like music classes and schools and like tea, like food, dinner and so on. And they recorded everything meticulously in the notes. Now, this is like the low-key version of, I think, what we're doing with data today. And you can see it's like, it's totally not scalable, right? It's like 8 research assistants, 1 kid over like 24 hours. And also in a way, not really natural. Like it's not entirely clear how that boy felt, like having 8 people look over his shoulder the entire day and how natural his behavior really was. So I think like for me, it's like, could we replicate what they tried to do in the 1940s, but at scale and in a way that is much less intrusive? So this is really kind of what attracted me to this intersection of psychology and computer science.
That is so amazing, and as you were describing Raymond Birch and
Yes.
these 8 data scientists, right, following this person around, but you really don't know. There's so many questions left unanswered, right, that you just cannot get the information for based on that type of experiment. And one of the things that you alluded to, and I'd like to find out from you about this, is that when we know that there's a camera on us or that somebody's following us or that we are being asked questions in an interview type setting, we may show up differently for that than we would if we were at home having a conversation around the dinner table with a family member, right? So from your perspective, I just, from a psychological perspective, I'm curious, are you the same with us right now as we're having this conversation in the moment? Are you the same Sandra with the same type of energy and so forth as you are at home on a Saturday night when you're relaxing?
It's such a great question because it gets to like one of these shifts in the way that I think personality psychologists are currently thinking about what does personality even mean? So it used to be the case, like, what does it mean to be me? Right? And am I always the same person? And if I'm not, is that just like hypocritical, or is that like you're disingenuous, you're not authentic? And I think what psychologists have landed, or like personality psychologists have landed on in the last couple of years, is this idea that there's something core to our identity, right? So we all have certain dispositions, so tendencies to act and think and feel in a certain way that are independent of the situation. So there's something core to who we are, and some of that is driven by genetics, and some of it is driven by upbringing, but there's something that makes us ourselves. But just as much as that is true, we also know that people can fluctuate across different situations. So instead of having this one point estimate that says, well, Sandra score is more extroverted than, say, 70% of the population, what we acknowledge now is you yourself are a distribution of personality states. So yes, most of the time, maybe you're like around 70% on extroversion. But if I put you in a very social situation, right? For me, for example, I'm first of all much more introverted. So I would probably be somewhere on like 30%. So much more towards the introverted. But if you put me in the classroom, I can certainly be more extroverted, right? So in this case, it's a situation that requires me to be a little bit more outgoing and entertaining, because that's what the students expect. And it's not necessarily disingenuous and inauthentic. It just means that I can deviate from my preferred tendency depending on the situation. The same is true for when I'm spending time at home, right? If I'm spending time at home and I'm just sitting there with a book, I'm probably even more introverted than I typically am. So the way that we think about personality traits today is not just a point estimate, is not just I'm going to give you one label and I'm going to put you in that box, but we acknowledge that depending on the situation, you can fluctuate from your mean, and that's still you. It's you in a certain situation. And what's interesting for psychologists is that those fluctuations aren't random. But if let's say I understand that Jay typically is a 70% on extroversion, but I now understand that I'm putting you in a social situation, chances are that most people in that social situation feel more extroverted than they typically do. Or if I put you in a situation where it's really just you by yourself, no one else around, you're probably going to be more introverted. So we have an understanding of your tendency. And if we understand the situation, we can also make an educated guess of whether you might be a little bit above your typical average, or you might be a little bit below your typical average. And I think what I like about this notion is it makes us a little bit more dynamic as individuals, right? It acknowledges that we're not always the same. And instead of labeling this as error or like disingenuity or like you're not being authentic, it just says like, no, this is still part of who you are. It's you in a certain context.
Wow, that is so, so good. And for all of you that are watching and listening right now, put a pin in that point, because this becomes relevant, even more relevant, as the conversation continues, as we talk about collecting data and using that data from a predictive modeling perspective to look at influencing behaviors and decisions and outcomes, etc. So hold on to that thought, because more to come on that one. And I'll share with you, I don't know if you've read the book Quiet by Susan Cain.
No, but it's probably like the rise of the introverts.
Oh, yes, it is. And then some. It is an excellent book. So I would highly suggest for you to read that, as well as everyone who's watching and listening right now. So I learned a lot about myself through reading that book. I'm certainly more of an introvert. But to your point, in certain settings, I almost feel like a chameleon in a way. I'm still me at my core, but my energy level shifts. But what happens is when I'm in a setting like 2 nights ago, I was the MC for a large event. There were about 350 people there. And my energy level is considerably higher, right? I'm showing up differently. But when I'm done, I am done. I have nothing left to give.
This is actually, Yep.
So let me ask you this, to that point, and I don't want to dwell on this, but I'm just curious because I can learn from you, knowing that you're more of an introvert. When you are finished teaching and you're with your students, or you're giving a keynote, or whatever it happens to be, where you're showing up with with certainly more energy, what are you doing to recharge and reset yourself so you can then be better prepared to do that, to show up that way again the next day or whenever you need to?
It's a great question. And it actually, again, comes back to, I think, what we've learned from psychology, this idea that, people can act out of character, right? Even if you're an introvert, you can obviously, because at the end of the day, it's a behavioral expression. You can kind of dial up your energy levels and you can be more outgoing. You can have social conversations. It's not that introverts don't know how to do it. It's just that, as you said, it's typically energy depleting. So one of the ways in which people oftentimes think of extroversion is, if I pop you into a social situation, do you leave that social situation energized or depleted? Now, when I leave the classroom, I'm just wiped, right? As you said, it just takes a lot of my energy because it's not my preferred state that I'm in. If you contrast that to my husband, like whenever we leave a social situation, my husband is just like loves it and is energized, and I'm like, I just need a break. The one thing that works really well for me is music. And I think there's like, we know so much more now from neuroscience of like how music really kind of penetrates the brain, kind of regulates the nervous system. For me, I know that some people just tend to do like meditation, focus on yourself. That just, it just never worked for me because my mind is racing. And what really helps me is music. So music always just kind of gives, even like a few minutes, it just kind of gives me like this reset.
Okay, so Sandra, I have to ask, right? I can't let this one go. So are we talking classical music? Are we talking classic rock? What are we talking about here?
It very much depends what I'm in the mood for. So, I mean, now this is like the go-to is actually Taylor Swift, because Taylor Swift is like, it's uplifting and it's like, it's not complicated, right? The music is like, why is it so popular? Because it like everybody can easily relate to it. If I feel a little bit funkier, I love electro swing. There's like a band called Power of Stella that I adore. And it's like, it's uplifting, but it's not too much. So yeah. And then if I'm really angry because something upset me in the classroom or in a meeting, then I go to Linkin Park, actually. That just helps me down-regulate in a nice way.
You are
so all the way from
over
Taylor
the
Swift
place.
to yeah.
First of all, I think that's fantastic. Plus, it shows that you are a complex human being, just like we all are. Yeah. And I do love that. By the way, side note, so I studied music in college. That's really what where I was going to go from a career perspective, but decided to go in a different direction, and business and psychology became my primary interest. But very, very interesting. So let's talk about psychological targeting. So there's a few things that we've alluded to that you've already mentioned, but I want to bring it together and tie a bow around what it is. And you're speaking to an audience today that it's wide ranging. So you're going to have your entrepreneurs, you're going to have business owners, you're going to have those who are very interested in personal growth and personal development, looking for ways to become better, to learn, to improve themselves. So with that in mind, what is psychological targeting? What do we need to know about it? And we're going to dig a little deeper in that area as we continue the conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's essentially two parts to psychological targeting, the way that I think about it. And for all of the nerds in this audience, I think about it as reading and writing. It's like you raise your hand. It's like reading and writing. So, when you kind of go to the level of like file permissions, sometimes you can just read the file and sometimes you can also write into the file. And I think of psychological targeting as reading from the mind. So trying to understand what is going on inside, your psychology, your mind, what do you care about? and then also writing into the mind, which is changing the way that you think, feel, and behave. So if you look at this first part, which is the reading part, it's really the ability of algorithms to take all of the data that you generate, and that is pretty widely construed. So anything from, again, these kind of explicit identity claims, like social media posts, stuff that you intentionally put out there, all the way to these cues, which we would call behavioral residue, which is just really kind of traces that you create as you interact with technology and you don't think about them intentionally. So like, again, your smartphone capturing your GPS records or your credit card swipes, and algorithms kind of taking these individual data points and almost like piecing together a puzzle, understanding who the person behind that is. So understanding what does your data say about your personality, your personal values, your life satisfaction, maybe your mental health status. So that is for me the reading part. Like, can I learn something about your psychology, your preferences, your needs, your desires, aspirations, fears, and so on by looking at your data? And then from there comes the second part. Once I have that understanding, right? Once I understand what might motivate you, what might get you to do something, I can actually use that understanding to potentially change the way that you think, feel, and behave. And for me, that's the writing part. That's the much more active part where we say, okay, if you're the person who's trying to improve the way that they exercise, or kind of the way that they manage their finances, the way that they eat healthily, can I use my understanding of what drives you and what potentially motivates you to help you accomplish this goal? You can imagine that this also works in a different way, where once I understand, again, what motivates you, your preferences, I can also use it to sell you stuff that maybe you need and maybe sometimes you don't. So kind of this very strong focus on the second part of what is the power that I gain from understanding you on a psychological level based on your data.
Okay, so let's talk then on the social media side. In terms of big data, what's being collected. So you kind of gave broad brush of the types of data, but let's drill down on social media. So as an example, let's just use Facebook for lack of a better platform. What is it? Is it likes? So if I see a post and I click like, is that data could that data be collected to say this is a data point that shows that Jay has a preference for boom, 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 these things?
I mean, pretty much anything that you do on these platforms creates data. The question is just like, who has access to them, right? If you think of Facebook, it's not just like what you like. It's not just what you post. It's also like which kind of parts of your newsfeed do you actually stop and take a look at? So that's just like what is grabbing your attention that Facebook can make sense of. What are the messages that you're sending that are private? What are the pictures that you're posting? And sometimes it's not even the pictures that you're posting. Sometimes it's the pictures that your friends are posting, and they tag you because you were either part of it or just kind of it happened. You happened to walk in the background of someone's vacation. They posted, and like with facial recognition, an algorithm can figure out that this is you in the picture, right? So if we think of social media, it's incredibly rich, both in terms of the traces that we intentionally put there, but also the traces of, we kind of scroll through the news feed and we hover over certain things. And all of this stuff is data that certainly Facebook collects, not necessarily something that I can easily access as a third party or a researcher, but it's certainly data that speaks to your preferences.
That's so interesting. And what is the accuracy like of the data that's being collected? So in some of the case studies that you've researched and some of your own research, talk to us about accuracy.
And for me, it's always interesting. The question is like, how do you capture accuracy, right? If I tell you, you give me access to all of the Facebook pages that you follow, or you give me access to all of the Facebook posts that you put out there. So like language, to what extent can I use these individual traces and translate them to something that's meaningful on a psychological level? Let's say big 5 personality traits, because that's one of the psychological frameworks that we actually use a lot, because we know that it's related to a lot of actual behavioral outcomes. So big 5 personality traits, which are openness to experience, conscientiousness, which is how organized, dependable you are, extroversion, agreeableness, which is how empathetic, caring, trusting, and then neuroticism. We know that these 5 traits just explain a lot of outcomes that we oftentimes care about, from kind of vocational interest to music preferences to life satisfaction, physical health, mental health. So it's a framework that psychologists gravitate to just because it explains behavior across many different situations. If you look at how accurately you can predict these big 5 personality traits from Facebook likes, I could throw numbers at you, right? I could tell you, well, the correlation between your self-reported personality and a computer-based prediction is a 0.5. And then you would rightfully ask,
what does that mean?
Yes, exactly. Is that good? Is that bad? We don't really know. So one of my colleagues at the University of Cambridge, who got her PhD with me there, she came up with this really smart way of quantifying just how good algorithms are at predicting our personality. So what she said is like, why don't we compare the accuracy of a computer, of an algorithm, to the accuracy of people in our environment that should know us pretty well. So that ranges anywhere from work colleagues to friends to family members, all the way to people's spouses. So the way that this experiment would go, say you come in, we ask you to complete a personality questionnaire. So you tell us, I think of myself as more extroverted, more agreeable, and more neurotic based on the questions that we ask you. Then you give us access to all of your Facebook likes in this case. So that was the study that she ran. Now we have a computer, we train a model that takes your Facebook likes, turns it into personality predictions, and we get a sense of like how good those are. Now we also ask your friends, coworkers, family members, and your spouse to complete the questionnaire on your behalf. So how extroverted do you think Jay would describe himself? How neurotic do you think he is? How open-minded do you think he is? And now we have a direct comparison. So now we can essentially pit the algorithm against the people who should know you pretty well and say, well, is the computer purely accessing your Facebook likes better than work colleagues? Answer is yes. The computer needs about 10 Facebook likes to be better than people's colleagues, needs about 65 likes to be better than people's friends, 120 likes to be better than family members. And mind you, those are people who should know you pretty well, right? Those are kids, siblings, parents. They typically spend a decent amount of time with you and observe you across many different situations and across time. And yet a computer is still better at predicting your personality than your family members. 300 likes to be better than someone's spouse. When the study was conducted, I think the average number of likes in the data set was about 250. So the computer back then, 10 years ago now almost, was already better than everybody except for the spouse based on just your Facebook likes. So you can imagine that if I had access to more data than just social media and by now better algorithms, the computer would probably also be better than our closest confidants, if you want. So they're certainly not perfect, and important to highlight, right? Because they do make mistakes. And if we think about application, that matters. But they're definitely pretty accurate.
That is crazy. So this goes back 10 years when this was first being, when this test was being done. Can you give me an idea how large the sample was?
I think it was like 30,000 people. So it's huge.
Good size.
Yeah.
Okay. Really good size. Okay.
Big size.
So how has AI impacted the accuracy? Have you seen an increase as a result of AI being used in aggregating and calculating the data, or how AI is being used in other ways to supplement and to be used through this type of work?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think what AI has actually contributed, like AI as in these more advanced transformer models, right? Generative AI, ChatGPT, models that were not explicitly trained to do a certain job. So when we started, it was a model that was explicitly trained to take your Facebook likes, make a prediction about your personality. And that was the only thing it could do. The moment that I had a different data set or the moment that I wanted a different psychological outcome, that model was completely useless. So what generative AI has actually done is, in a way, has democratized access to these predictions. Because now you don't need a proprietary data set anymore to now build a proprietary model that then allows you to make these predictions. This is like what happened 10 years ago in a supervised machine learning space. With generative AI, I can essentially just take an off-the-shelf ChatGPT, right? Anyone can have access to ChatGPT. I can scrape your tweets, your social media posts, again, like anything from credit card spending, purchases, and just pop it into ChatGPT and ask it, hey, here's the data that I observe for someone. Can you tell me what that person might look like in terms of a big 5 personality profile? Do you think they're more extroverted, more introverted? And by the way, also explain to me why you make these predictions. So, and it actually does a pretty remarkable job at making these predictions. It's almost as good as the ones that are specifically trained for this, right? You have a model that all it does is make those predictions. And now you have a model that is supposed to kind of predict the next word in a sentence. That's what these transformer models, these LLMs were trained for. And yet, because they've read the entire internet, they understand psychology and then make very similar predictions. And the benefit that you have is you can interact with them, right? You can say, well, again, tell me, why do you think Jay is introverted? Tell me, why do you think he's conscientious? And then it kind of goes back to some of the data points that you give it. And you can even ask it, okay, now I have this understanding. First of all, how confident are you in the predictions that you're making? What other data would be helpful to know to increase your level of confidence? What are some of the questions that I could be asking Jay if I meet him to kind of get a better sense of whether he's actually introverted or actually neurotic? So there's like this interactive element that we have with LLMs that not only democratizes access to these predictions, but also allows you to go a step further and say, okay, here's stuff that I don't know from the historical data that I could get on Jay, but I have a good sense of like what I maybe should be getting or the questions that I could be asking him, either as a chatbot or me as a person on a podcast.
Okay, so 2 things. Number one, I want to talk about specific case studies on how this information has been used, what businesses have used it, maybe, and it doesn't even have to be a business, right? But I mean, give us an example, but a real world example. But before we do that, as you were going through this, talk about energy and talk about being able to feel someone's energy. This is obviously something that is incredibly exciting to you. I could feel your energy level go up just virtually right here. So and I love that, and I thank you for that. That just shows all of us one of the areas that gets you so incredibly excited. So let's talk case studies. So give us maybe 1 or 2 from 2 completely different disciplines. And what I would love for you to do also, as we talk about the ethical implications of this, right? Because that becomes very important. Yeah. And offline, you and I were talking about one in particular, which was the very first one that I ever became aware of. But this has been used way before that. But do give us a couple of examples and speak to the ethical side of this.
And I think it's a great question, because the examples that immediately popped up in my mind is essentially like what's important for me, and like something that I've been thinking about a lot is, at the end of the day, it's a technology, right? It's a technology that allows me to try and figure out your needs and preferences and then use this understanding to get you to do something that I want you to do. And from like what I've been trying to do in my research over the last, again, 10 years is try and show both sides, is essentially show, and the examples that I'm going to give you is I can use it to sell you products. So I can use it to get you to spend more. Just the same technology, same idea, I can also use to get you to save more. So for me, those are 2 examples which really nicely contrast, because it's the same principle, same mechanism with pretty much exactly the same effect size. And I'm going to talk about the details in a second, but really 2 vastly different purposes, right? One is kind of get you to reach into your pocket a little bit deeper, and the other one is prevent you from making these impulse purchases and put something back into your pocket. So where we started, and this is was one of the first studies that we did when I got interested in this type of research, was we teamed up with a beauty retailer in the UK. So the beauty retailer had a super simple goal. Their idea was, can we get women to click on a Facebook ad, go to the website and buy something? So they were completely agnostic as to which beauty products the women were buying, but they wanted to make the products more relevant to women, because it's not entirely clear a priori, right? If you think about who's the type of woman who buys beauty products, everybody. It just depends on what do you want to use it for? What do you see in these beauty products, in how they can help you satisfy some of the needs that you have. So what we did with this beauty retailer is we focused on the personality trait of extroversion. And we said, is there a way with working with a creative team is can you come up with ads that speak to the needs of extroverts to have stimulation, to kind of have something social going on, to be the center of attention? And what they came up with, is remarkable, because the only instructions that I gave them was come up with some extroverted ads that speak to some of these needs. And the ads would always kind of show women in a very social context on the dance floor, extremely saturated colors. So there was this constant stimulation and something exciting happening. The message said something dance like no one's watching, but they totally are. So playing with the need of extroverts to be the center of attention. And then contrast that to the introverted ones, which was always one woman, a quiet setting, maybe kind of using a beauty product at home in front of the mirror. And the message would say something like, beauty doesn't have to shout. So what I like about this example is it's the same product, right? You're not really kind of figuring out, okay, what exactly should we recommending to that person. We're just saying, can we make the beauty products relevant to different audiences by tapping into their psychology? And what we showed in this campaign was actually a 50% increase in purchases if we kind of got the targeting right. So if extroverted women saw the extroverted messages and introverted women saw the introverted messages, they were 50% more likely to not just click on the ad, but go to the website and then buy something. And for me, I remember, so again, almost 10 years ago now, it was pretty remarkable because it was such a small intervention. The only thing that we changed was the ad that people saw on Facebook. Once they went to the website, it looked the same for everybody. And that was obviously just a function of manpower. You can imagine with generative AI, which can not only predict your personality, but also then create content that really matches that and speaks to that. You could have customized the entire journey and potentially kind of driven up this return on investment for the matching conditions even more. So that was the first example that I think just highlighted that the power of, if we tap into your psychology, we can actually shift your behavior. And from there, we said
wait, before you go to the second example, I just want to, I want to, again, to wrap my own head around this, the introversion, extroversion piece, being able to collect those analytics to determine what my personality trait is. Yeah. That's being done through scraping the things that I like, the content I'm looking at, the things that are being shared with me on my profile. Is that right? Am I right in saying that?
It's a great question because I totally glossed over this. So the way that we did this, and those were campaigns that we run on Facebook, and you're absolutely right that Facebook doesn't allow you to target people based on extroversion and introversion. So, and not, by the way, not because they can't do it. They have a patent, 2015, that says we can predict personality based on the data that we collect about people. So the fact that they were so surprised when Cambridge Analytica allegedly used that in the 2016 election, I think is a little bit of a myth here.
But they don't. Scratcher.
Yeah, exactly. Well, just look at your patent from a year ago. But they don't make that option available to advertisers. What you can do on Facebook is you can essentially target people based on interests. And we had done all of this research showing that, here's certain Facebook pages that people follow that are empirically associated with being more extroverted and introverted. So you can imagine the extroverted pages is social stuff. So there's like, I think one of the kind of top ones is like beer pong, but then there's also TV series like Entourage, which is like a lot more extroverted. And then on the introverted side, you oftentimes have like fantasy novels, like Lord of the Rings, or you have sort of like manga, like stuff that puts you more in the introverted corner. And so now what we can do, instead of making predictions at the individual level, so in this case, we didn't go into all of your individual data, ran it through an algorithm and say, okay, we know that Jay is more extroverted or introverted. All we did was really define these somewhat anonymous audiences that says, if you're connected to at least one of these pages that we know empirically makes you more likely to be extroverted than the average person, we're going to put you in the extroverted category. So it's a super, super crude way of targeting. And I'm sure there were many misunderstood introverts in the extroverted group and vice versa, but it's a way of distinguishing, broadly speaking, two audiences. So again, for the fact that the targeting was super crude, we only customized the message. This 50% increase in both purchases and return on investment was actually pretty substantial.
Very, very interesting. Okay, thank you for the additional clarification there. Yeah. So let's go to your second example that you were going to share.
Yeah, and this one I'm personally kind of more excited about because it really shows how the same idea, the same approach technology can actually help people accomplish some of the goals that they set for themselves and are just having a hard time seeing through and accomplishing. And savings is like one of these topics that, first of all, it's a big struggle, especially in the US. So if you look at 50% of people live from paycheck to paycheck, 10% of people couldn't even go a week without being paid. And it's disastrous, right? So the only thing that has to happen to you is your car breaks down. You can't take it to the shop because you can't pay for the repairs. You can't get to work. You lose the job. So there's like this very, very quick downward spiral if you don't have at least some safety net and kind of safety cushion when it comes to savings. And what we try to do is we teamed up with a fintech company called Saver Life, and they work with low income households and individuals with very low levels of savings. So in our study, we only looked at people who had less than $100 in savings. So this is, again, like something needs to happen and that's game over. What we try to do over the course of 4 weeks in the context of a challenge that Save a Life put out there, what they call it the race to 100. The idea was to get people to save $100 over the course of 4 weeks. Okay. And again, it might not sound that much to some of your listeners, but that was doubling. That meant doubling the savings for the people in our sample. And what we try to do is we try to say, okay, Saver Life had been developing messaging around this race to 100, around trying to get people to save more. So they had what we call the gold standard in the way that we talk about it in the scientific paper. So this is the message that they've been trying to optimize for a long time. And what we did is we surveyed. So in this case, it was actually survey based. So we surveyed with users' consent the users of Saver Life with a personality questionnaire. And then we said, okay, based on your most salient traits, so the one that stands out the most, if you're a 99 on extroversion, you're going to be put in the extroverted category. If you're a 2% on neuroticism, then we're going to put you in the emotionally stable category because that's the one that's kind of the most extreme across all of your personality traits. And we came up with messaging, again, in collaboration with the team of Saver Life to say, well, what could motivate someone who is, say, agreeable, so who cares about their social relationships, is trusting, is caring, what could motivate them to put some money to the side right now? It's probably not just an additional dollar in the bank account. It's probably not a competitive advantage over their neighbors. What motivates them is to say, no, if I put some money to the side right now, I can make sure that my loved ones, the people I care for, the people who are dependent on me, they're safe and secure now and in the future. So this is kind of was the motivation behind it and the idea. And what we showed, again, similar to the beauty retailer, is that compared to Save a Life's gold standard, so the message that they've been using and optimizing for a while, using this personality matching, we could actually increase the number of people, the percentage of people who met their $100 saving goal by 60%. Now, still far from perfect. There were still many, many people who didn't hit that goal, but it's a pretty substantial uptake, right? And so for me, it's like a nice equivalent to, yeah, we can boost sales by 50%, but we can also boost the number of people who kind of have a hard time saving, hit the saving goal by about 60%.
That's incredible. That truly is. Now, Savor Life is a real organization. This is a real company that you were working with. So is it still viable? Are they still out there and helping and doing these sorts of work for those that are underprivileged?
So they're still doing that. One of the interesting questions in that space is actually, and this is oftentimes what you don't see in like scientific research, is what does it mean in the long run? But if I now have a campaign that comes up with these extroverted messages or agreeable messages that probably drives a lot of this behavior for the first time. Now, at some point, it might actually become super boring. If I'm constantly optimizing for this one personality trait and all of the messages that you see are constantly the same, at some point it's going to take away the appeal. So I think the questions that we had with Savor Life is, to what extent do we pivot to some of the other traits that maybe are not as salient, but still make you and who you are. So this is like, it's ongoing, and we're not doing scientific work on this anymore because that's harder. You have to randomly assign people. So they're kind of still using some of that, but it's an interesting question, which also applies to other contexts, right? Like if the beauty retailer that we worked with, if they use psychological targeting and figure out, yeah, you're extroverted and maybe we can speak to this motivation, maybe that's super beneficial. But then if all of the beauty retailers jumped on the same board, kind of on this, and did the same thing, maybe it's going to lose its appeal because all you see is the same thing again and again, and it just becomes really boring. So that's, for me, an open question that we don't really have an answer for yet.
Yeah, that is an interesting one, because I'm always thinking about we've done this, right? Yeah. We have formed some... We have some research. We have some not only assumptions, we've been able to prove through research that these things actually work, right? There's science behind it. Okay, what's next? So where do we take this? Because to your point, and we've seen this happen certainly before, where all of a sudden, other organizations or companies that are in a similar space are paying attention. Okay, what are they doing? They figure it out, and then it just becomes noise. Yeah. Right. And then we tend to block it out. So what are we going to do different? How are we going to continue to move that ball down the field? So that's a really interesting piece of the conversation. So talk about, I want to go back to the ethical implications, because you kind of dropped very quickly about Cambridge Analytics or Analytica, and that's probably one that many people have heard of, but there's also many people who of a newer generation that maybe aren't quite familiar with that. So just give us maybe a thumbnail about what happened there, and then maybe speak to the ethical implications of that specifically and how we might apply that to other areas as well.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it's funny because what happened there, we still don't fully know. What allegedly happened, according to Cambridge Analytica themselves. So Cambridge Analytica was a PR company in the UK, and they got infamous claim to fame was that essentially they said, we worked for the Trump campaign in the 2016 election. We got access to the Facebook data of millions of people. We ran that data through our predictive models, predicted some of these big 5 personality traits, mostly focusing on some of people's vulnerabilities. So trying to figure out what are some of the emotional triggers, what are some of the things that people are afraid of, what are some of the things that people are worried about. And then they allegedly used, again, this understanding of people's psychology to not actually help Donald Trump win the election. What they try to do is discourage people who would otherwise have potentially voted for Hillary Clinton to just stay home and not vote. And for me, that kind of really gets to this question of at what point do we think of this as helpful advice as opposed to undue manipulation? And I think it all comes down to this question of, are you actually helping someone move in the direction that they would actually want to go in naturally anyway, and they're just having a hard time, right? Savings is, most people understand that they should be saving more, and most people are motivated. It's just that life is really hard. And there's so many other things that pop up that might derail you from the path that you wanted to go down. So if we can use psychological targeting to help you move in the direction that you wanted to go in, it's probably helpful. If that's not the case, if I try to push you further away from what you're trying to accomplish, and that just benefits me, I think that's like a very clear kind of sign of manipulation. Now, it's true, and this for me makes it an interesting conversation, for example, in the classroom. So I teach this class on the ethics of data. People have vastly different ideas of what is ethical and what crosses the boundary. So on some level, I think as business leaders, it means that you want to sample a lot of opinions, because what you might think is ethical and still acceptable might not be what other people, including your customers, think of as acceptable and ethical. And one of the simplest ways, like as a starting point that I like, is first of all, you should never stop at what's legal. Like there's so many, and I see this especially in the younger MBA students coming through Columbia, is like, the question is always, okay, but what can I get away with? I'm like, no. Just let me stop you right. That's not the question that you should be asking. The question that you should be asking yourself is, where would I be in an ideal case? And you're not going to ever always live up to these standards, right? But you should at least aspire to. So don't stop at what's legal. You should be asking yourself what's ethical. And a simple way that I like a thought experiment, is like Warren Buffett's newspaper test. Like if you imagine you're using data in a certain way, and tomorrow your local newspaper, so the newspaper that is being read by the community of people that you care about, that you appreciate and that you want to appreciate you, would you feel comfortable being exposed on the front page of that newspaper? But if the newspaper reported on your data practices, would you kind of feel, oh my God, now I've been exposed? Or would you feel proud that here's actually something that you're doing that benefits individuals in society? And it's such a simple test, but I think it allows us to look inward and be a little bit more honest with ourselves of whether we're just kind of lying to ourselves so that we can reap the benefits of higher profits, whatever it is, competitive advantage, or do we actually believe that it creates value for the people that we're serving?
Yeah, you've given us a lot to think about here. And for all of you watching and listening right now, I know that this has been a fascinating conversation for you. It's been a fascinating conversation for me. And I would love it, Sandra, if we could continue this conversation at a later date, because I want to stay with you as you continue to do additional research and then bring you back to talk more about what you've learned and some of the other theories and theses that you are working on. That to me would be very interesting. So can I get your commitment to join me again at some point in the future?
I think you've noticed that I enjoy talking about this stuff. So yes.
Okay, great. So I've got two final questions and an ask for you. My first question is this: what are one or two bigger questions that you're contemplating today, things that might keep you up at night, things that, it could be business, it could be life, education, it doesn't matter, but one or two of the big questions?
Yeah, so I think one of the big questions for me, because I really think about this in terms of here's the opportunities, and I do believe there's tremendous opportunities of using this data, but I also constantly am terrified by the downside and the dark side of here's how it could be used against us. And what I'm trying to think about is like, how do we eliminate this trade-off? Like because if that's the trade-off that we face as users and as companies, it's like either we can reap the benefits of convenience, service, personalization, but we have to give up our privacy and self-determination. My concern is that everybody's going to gravitate towards the immediate reward, which is convenience and service. And so I think a lot about what are some of the technological solutions that might kind of break down this dichotomy. What are some of the regulations that would have to be put in place for this to work? So this is something is really thinking about, like, how do we navigate this world in a way that we're not just putting the burden on us as individuals, but we can change something systemically through regulation technology that really helps people maximize the utility without the risk of them being exposed and manipulated. So I think that's, if I had to pin it down, that's the one thing that I'm thinking a lot about.
That is a really good and big question to think about. Thank you so much for sharing that. And then here is my final question before my ask. So my final question is, what is the most difficult decision that you have had to make in the pursuit of the person who you are today?
It's the most difficult decision that I had to make. Yeah. It's a great question. I mean, I think it's actually a decision that was made for me. So one of the questions that I was never sure about, and this is like, I'm sure a question that many people have faced in their careers is, do I want to have kids? So you are your own person, right? Talk about personality. You have a core identity, and my identity was very much focused on, I'm a scientist. I'm like, I have a career, and I'm like, well, I kind of also do want a family, but it's interfering with my core identity. And I think like a friend of mine said it so nicely, and that we now have a son who's one, so you can see where this ended up. But what he said is like, I never wanted to have kids. I wanted to have a family. And I think for me, this was like such a different way of thinking about it. It's not that suddenly a kid is taking away from your identity of who you are. It's just kind of expanding it, and it creates a family. It's not that it's just like something that you now also have responsibility for. So this is like, it's a very personal one, but I know that I've been thinking about this a lot, and I'm sure that many listeners have potentially gone through similar experiences.
No doubt. I love that one. I always think about adding the word and. So you're both a scientist and a mother. Why can't I be both? Well, you can, right? You made a conscious choice. And I think to what you just said, I think that by starting a family, it will actually expand your worldview. You'll start to think differently about certain things. And I think you'll find that it was actually a huge blessing that you made that decision.
Except for nights. If someone wants to cover the nights, he's available. He's available
All
3
right.
to 5.
There you go. We might have a listener reach out to you.
Exactly.
So here is my ask. I would love it if you would give all of our listeners and me a challenge. What is one thing that you would challenge us to do starting today?
One thing I would love more people to do is just be a little bit more generous in your interpretation of like the stuff that people say when you disagree. I think we could change so much about this world is if we don't just always jump to the conclusion of like, they're just kind of, they have like bad intentions. They're kind of trying to screw me over. Just be a little bit more generous in the way that you interpret the views of people who see the world a bit different to you.
Beautifully said. Thank you so much for sharing that challenge. And for all of you, I certainly hope the 2 words that you're saying to yourself right now are challenge accepted. All right, fantastic. Sandra, I want to thank you so very much for joining us today on Business Minds Coffee Chat. What a brilliant conversation. I loved being around your energy. Thank you so much for sharing your wisdom, being candid and vulnerable, right? And being your true, authentic self. Thank you so much. I've learned a lot from you, and I'm grateful for you.
Thank you. It was a fun conversation, and I'm going to get the shirt that you're wearing for my husband. For those who don't see it, it's like it says, I'm listening. I think I'm going to order it immediately.
Very good. I can tell you exactly where to get it. All right. And for all of you, I want to thank all of you for watching and for listening. And I do have a super quick favor. Would you take just a moment to subscribe, rate, and leave us a review on Apple Podcasts? Let us know what you thought about this particular episode. I would love that. And I will share your feedback with Sandra. And to watch more episodes and to listen, all you need to do is visit jscherbusinessconsulting.com, click that podcast button. And my friends, until next time, keep learning, keep growing. Make sure that you run out and buy a copy of Mindmasters and apply the lessons you learn. And we'll see you on the next Business Minds Coffee Chat. Take care, everybody.